What happens when one of country music's most beloved icons decides she's had enough of the game's talk shows play? Tonight, we're breaking down the moment Reba McEntire walked off Jimmy Fallon's set. And trust me, you won't believe how this all unfolded. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrities standing their ground on live television. Now let's dive in. The Tonight's Show stage was buzzing with its usual energy. The band wrapped up their intro music as Jimmy Fallon bounded out with that signature enthusiasm he's known for. The audience was packed, cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal for another celebrity interview. But what nobody in that studio knew was that they were about to witness something that would have everyone talking for weeks. Jimmy took his seat behind the desk, shuffling his note cards with a grin. All right, folks. Our next guest is a true legend. She sold over 75 million records. She's conquered Broadway. She's a television star, and honestly, she's just an absolute icon. Please welcome the one and only Reba McEntire. The crowd erupted as Reba walked onto the stage. She smiled and waved, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done thousands of these appearances. She settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and giving Jimmy a polite nod. Reba, welcome back to the show, Jimmy said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. Thanks for having me, Jimmy, Reba replied, her Oklahoma accent warm but measured. So, I have to ask right off the bat, and I know everyone wants to know this. You've been in the entertainment business for what, over 4 decades now? That's right, Reba said simply. Jimmy flipped through his cards. That's incredible. And you're still going strong, still touring, still recording. What's the secret? Is it the hair? I feel like it's the hair. He gestured to his own hair with a playful smile. The audience chuckled. Reba gave a small smile, but didn't laugh. Well, I think it's about loving what you do and respecting the people who support you. Absolutely. Absolutely, Jimmy nodded. But he was already moving on. So, I was reading about your upcoming tour, and I saw that you're doing some really big venues. Madison Square Garden, the Staples Center, all these massive places. Do you ever get nervous before going on stage at this point in your career? Reba shifted slightly in her seat. You know, there's always a little bit of anticipation. You want to give people the best show possible. These folks are spending their hard-earned money and their valuable time to come see you perform. You owe them everything you've got. Right, Jimmy said, but his eyes were already on the next card. And speaking of performances, I heard a story, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard that early in your career you performed at a rodeo and your microphone cut out and you just kept singing without it. Is that true? Yes, that happened more than once actually, Reba said. Technology wasn't always reliable, and you just had to make it work. Jimmy laughed. See, that's amazing. Can you imagine doing that today? People would just walk off the stage. He mimed throwing down a microphone. The audience laughed. Reba didn't. Well, I think it shows the difference between being a professional and being a quitter. There was a slight pause. Jimmy's smile flickered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. Totally. So, let's talk about your new album. You've got new music coming out, which is exciting. Tell us about that. I'd be happy to, Reba said, sitting up a bit straighter. This album has been a real labor of love. I worked with some incredible songwriters, and we really tried to capture stories that matter. Songs about real people, real struggles, real triumphs. It's not just about catchy hooks. It's about substance. That's great, Jimmy said, nodding along, but clearly already thinking about his next question. And is there a particular song on the album that means the most to you? Reba paused, choosing her words carefully. There's a song called The Long Way Home that's very personal to me. It's about the journey of life, the choices we make, the roads we take. Sometimes the path that looks easiest isn't the one that leads to where you need to be. Deep stuff, Jimmy said with a slight smirk. So, is this like a metaphor for your career or... Reba's expression hardened just a fraction. It's a metaphor for life, Jimmy. For anyone who's ever had to make a difficult choice or stand up for what they believe in. Cool, Jimmy said, moving right along. So, I also wanted to ask you about your time on Broadway. You did that stint in Annie Get Your Gun, which was huge. Was that scary transitioning from country music to musical theater? It was a challenge, but challenges are what keep you growing as an artist, Reba said. Broadway audiences are incredibly sophisticated. They know their craft. You can't phone it in, right? You can't just show up and expect them to love you because you're famous, Jimmy said with a chuckle. That's exactly right, Reba said firmly. Fame doesn't mean anything if you're not putting in the work and respecting your audience. Jimmy laughed awkwardly. Well, yeah. I think most people try to respect their audience. He glanced at his cards again. So, let me ask you this because I'm curious. You've done so many different things: music, television, Broadway, even voice acting in animated films. What's next for Reba McEntire? Are you going to become an astronaut? Go to space? The audience laughed. Reba did not. I think what's next is continuing to do meaningful work, she said evenly. Not everything has to be a joke or a gimmick. Some of us are actually trying to create art that matters. The laughter died down. Jimmy's smile became a bit more strained. Sure, I was just, having a little fun with it. I understand that, Reba said, her tone cool. But there's a difference between having fun and being dismissive. The audience was silent now. Jimmy shifted in his seat. Dismissive? I don't think I'm being dismissive. You've barely let me finish a single thought before moving on to the next question, Reba said calmly but firmly. You asked me about a song that's deeply personal to me. And before I could really explain what it means, you reduced it to a smirk and a throwaway comment. That's dismissive, Jimmy. Jimmy held up his hands. Whoa, hold on. I'm just trying to keep the energy up. You know how these shows work. We've got commercial breaks. We've got time constraints. I've done hundreds of these interviews, Reba said. I know how they work. And I also know the difference between keeping energy up and being respectful. One doesn't have to come at the expense of the other. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Jimmy looked uncomfortable, glancing toward his producers off camera. Okay, I hear what you're saying. I apologize if I came across as dismissive. That wasn't my intention. Reba studied him for a moment. All right. I appreciate that. Great, Jimmy said, clearly eager to move past the awkward moment. So let's talk about something fun. I know you're a big fan of horses. You grew up around them, right? I did, Reba said cautiously. Do you still ride? When I have the time, yes. That's awesome. Have you ever fallen off a horse? Reba blinked. Of course. Anyone who rides has taken a fall at some point. Did you get hurt? Sometimes. Ever break anything? I broke my collarbone once. Jimmy's eyes lit up. Really? How did that happen? Reba looked at him with clear annoyance now. I fell off a horse, Jimmy. I just told you that. Right, but what were the circumstances? Was it dramatic? Were you doing something crazy? No, I was just riding, Reba said flatly. The horse spooked. I fell. I broke my collarbone. It's not a funny story. I wasn't saying it was funny. What do you mean? Jimmy asked, his voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. We're having a conversation right now. No, you're asking questions and barely listening to my answers, Reba said, her voice steady but firm. There's a difference. A conversation is a two-way street where both people are engaged and present. This feels more like you're running through a checklist. Jimmy laughed nervously. Well, I do have questions prepared. That's kind of how interviews work. I know how interviews work, Jimmy, Reba said, leaning forward slightly. I've been doing them since before you were born. And the best ones, the ones that actually mean something, happen when the interviewer is genuinely interested in what the guest has to say, when they listen, when they follow up with thoughtful questions, when they create space for real dialogue. I am listening, Jimmy protested. Are you? Reba asked. Because I just told you about a song that means a great deal to me, and you couldn't wait to move past it. I shared something personal about my approach to performing, and you made a joke. Every single thing I've said, you've either rushed past or trivialized. Jimmy's face flushed slightly. Look, I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I have a show to run here. I have a format to follow. I can't just let every interview turn into a deep philosophical discussion. Nobody's asking for a philosophical discussion, Reba said calmly. I'm asking for basic respect and genuine interest. Those aren't unreasonable expectations. The camera cut to audience members looking at each other, clearly unsure how to react. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed riveted by the unfolding confrontation. Jimmy took a breath, trying to reset. Okay, let's start over. What would you like to talk about? Reba shook her head slowly. That's not the point. The point is that you should want to know about the things I came here to discuss. My new album, my upcoming tour, the work I'm doing. Instead, you're treating this like a game show where you fire off random questions and hope something sticks. I asked you about your album, Jimmy said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You asked me about it for approximately 30 seconds before moving on to whether I'm going to become an astronaut, Reba countered. Do you see the problem there? Jimmy shifted in his chair, his discomfort now obvious. I was trying to be playful. Playful is fine, Reba said. But not when it comes at the expense of substance. Not when it makes it clear that you don't actually care about what I'm doing or why I'm here. That's not fair, Jimmy said, his voice rising slightly. I invited you on the show. Obviously I care. Did you? Reba asked. Or did your producers invite me because I have a new album coming out and they thought it would be good for ratings? Jimmy's jaw tightened. That's how the business works. Reba, you know that guests come on to promote things. That's the deal. And hosts are supposed to facilitate that promotion by having meaningful conversations that make people want to support the guest's work. Reba shot back. Not by treating them like props in their comedy routine. The audience was transfixed. This had gone far beyond a typical awkward interview moment. This was a genuine conflict playing out in real time. Jimmy tried again. I really think you're reading too much into this. I'm just trying to entertain people. At whose expense? Reba asked quietly. That question hung in the air for a long moment. Jimmy opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I don't think I'm doing anything at your expense. You're not taking me seriously, Reba said. You're not taking my work seriously. You're treating this entire interview like it's an inconvenience you have to get through before you can do a sketch or play a game. That is not true, Jimmy said, his voice firm now. I have nothing but respect for you and your career. Then show it, Reba said simply. Show it by engaging with what I'm saying. Show it by asking follow-up questions that demonstrate you are actually listening. Show it by treating this conversation like it matters. Jimmy rubbed his face with his hands. I don't know what you want from me right now. I want you to be present, Reba said. I want you to care. Is that really so difficult? I am present, Jimmy insisted. I'm sitting right here. Your body is here, Reba said. But your mind is already on the next thing, the next joke, the next segment, the next guest. I can see it in your eyes. Jimmy, you're not here with me at all. Jimmy looked genuinely hurt by that. That's a pretty harsh assessment. It's an honest one, Reba replied. And I think if you're really truthful with yourself, you know I'm right. There was another long pause. The studio was so quiet you could hear the camera operators breathing. Finally, Jimmy spoke. Look, maybe my style isn't what you're used to. Maybe it's not what you prefer, but this is my show and this is how I do things. I'm not going to apologize for my approach. I'm not asking you to change your entire show, Reba said. I'm asking you to be a better listener, to be more thoughtful, to recognize that the person sitting across from you has something valuable to share, and it's your job to help them share it. I think I do that, Jimmy said defensively. Do you really? Reba challenged. Or do you think you do that because nobody's ever called you out on it before? Jimmy's expression hardened. Plenty of people have been on this show and had a great time. I've interviewed hundreds of guests, and I've never had this problem. Maybe they were too polite to say anything, Reba suggested. Maybe they just smiled and played along because that's what you're supposed to do. Maybe they went home feeling exactly like I feel right now, but didn't want to make waves. Or maybe, Jimmy said slowly, you're having a bad day and taking it out on me. Reba's eyes flashed. Don't do that. Don't dismiss what I'm saying by suggesting I'm emotional or irrational. I'm neither of those things. I'm frustrated, and I have every right to be. Okay, you're frustrated, Jimmy said, throwing his hands up. I get it. What do you want me to do about it? I want you to acknowledge that the way you've conducted this interview has been disrespectful, Reba said evenly. I want you to recognize that you haven't given me or my work the attention it deserves, and I want you to understand that this matters. It's not just about me. It's about how you treat all your guests. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I treat my guests with respect. If you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. You treat your guests like content, Reba corrected. Like segments to get through. Like means to an end. That's not respect, Jimmy. That's just business. And what's wrong with that? Jimmy asked. This is a business. This is television. We all know what we signed up for. I signed up to talk about my music and connect with people who might enjoy it, Reba said. I didn't sign up to be rushed through superficial questions by someone who's clearly just going through the motions. Jimmy's face was red now. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not the right host for you. Maybe you should do interviews with people who will sit there and nod thoughtfully while you talk for 20 minutes about the deep meaning behind every song you've ever written. There it is, Reba said quietly. The condescension. The diss. You just proved my point better than I ever could. Jimmy realized what he'd said and backtracked. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, Reba said. You meant it exactly like that. You think what I do is pretentious. You think taking my work seriously is somehow excessive or self-important. You've thought that this entire time, and now you finally said it out loud. That's not what I said, Jimmy protested weakly. It's exactly what you said, Reba countered. And it's exactly the attitude I've been talking about. You don't respect artists who want to discuss their craft with depth and sincerity. You want everything to be light and fun and easy. And if it's not, if someone wants to have a real conversation, you mock them for it. Jimmy shook his head. I'm not mocking you. You just did, Reba said firmly. You literally just mocked the idea of me wanting to discuss my songs meaningfully. You said it in a sarcastic tone, implying that it would be boring or ridiculous for me to expect that level of engagement. I was being defensive, Jimmy admitted. You're attacking me on my own show in front of my audience. I'm not attacking you, Reba said, her voice softening slightly. I'm trying to have an honest conversation with you about something that matters. The fact that you perceive that as an attack says a lot. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with what to say next. The audience waited with bated breath. So, what do you want to happen here? Jimmy finally asked. Do you want to continue the interview? Do you want to leave? What's the end game? Reba considered this. I want you to understand why I'm upset. I want you to really hear what I'm saying and think about it, not just dismiss it as me being difficult or having a bad day. And if I do that? Jimmy asked. If I sit here and acknowledge. Jimmy looked at her for a long moment, the wheels clearly turning in his head. When he spoke, his voice was measured but still carried an edge. Okay, I hear you. I understand that you feel like I haven't given you the time and attention you deserve. I understand that you think my interview style is too surface level. I understand all of that, but, Reba prompted, sensing there was more coming. But, Jimmy continued, I also think you need to understand something. This show isn't just about the guests. It's about the audience, too. It's about keeping people engaged and entertained. If I let every interview turn into a long, serious discussion, people would change the channel. That's just the reality of late-night television. Reba nodded slowly. So, what you're saying is that you prioritize entertainment over substance. I'm saying I try to balance both, Jimmy corrected. And I think most of the time I do a pretty good job of it. Most of the time isn't good enough, Reba said quietly. Not when it means sacrificing genuine connection and meaningful dialogue. Jimmy sighed heavily. Look, I get what you're saying. I really do. But I can't fundamentally change how I do my show just because one guest isn't happy with my approach. I'm not asking you to change your entire show, Reba repeated. I'm asking you to be more mindful, to listen better, to care more. Those aren't radical requests, Jimmy. Those are basic elements of human interaction in a normal conversation. Sure, Jimmy said, but this isn't a normal conversation. This is a televised interview with millions of people watching. There are different rules, different expectations. Why? Reba challenged. Why should being on television mean we have to be less authentic, less present, less respectful? Because that's how the medium works, Jimmy said, frustration creeping back into his voice. Because attention spans are short and people want to be entertained. Because if I sat here and had deep philosophical conversations with every guest, the show would be canceled in a month. Maybe the show deserves to be canceled if that's the case, Reba said flatly. The audience gasped. Jimmy's eyes widened. Excuse me? You heard me, Reba said, her voice calm but unwavering. If the only way your show can survive is by treating guests like disposable content and reducing everything to jokes and superficial banter, then maybe it's not a show worth having. Jimmy's face went from red to pale. That's incredibly disrespectful to me, to my staff, to everyone who works hard on this show every single day. Is it? Reba asked. Or is it just honest? You've been disrespectful to me this entire interview. But the moment I say something you don't like, suddenly I'm the one being disrespectful. I invited you here, Jimmy said, his voice rising. I gave you a platform to promote your album. I gave you airtime that other people would kill for, and this is how you repay me, by insulting my show and telling me it should be canceled. You didn't give me anything, Jimmy, Reba said firmly. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get content for your show. I get exposure for my album. Neither of us is doing the other a favor. And the fact that you think you are shows exactly the problem I've been talking about. Jimmy stood up suddenly, pacing behind his desk. The cameras followed him. I don't know what you want from me. I've apologized. I've listened to everything you've said. I've tried to understand your perspective, but nothing I say seems to be good enough for you. That's because you're saying the words without meaning them, Reba said, still seated but watching him carefully. You're apologizing because you think you have to, not because you actually understand what you did wrong. How do you know what I'm feeling? Jimmy demanded. How do you know what's in my head or my heart? Because I've been in this business for over 40 years, Reba said. I've dealt with hundreds of people like you. People who smile and nod and say all the right things, but don't actually mean any of it. Jimmy stopped pacing and turned to face her. That is not who I am. Then prove it, Reba challenged. Right now. Ask me a real question, something you actually want to know. Something that isn't on your little note cards. Show me that you're capable of having a genuine conversation. Jimmy stared at her, clearly caught off guard. The silence stretched out. The audience waited. Jimmy looked down at his desk, then back at Reba. His mouth opened, but no words came out. You can't do it, can you? Reba said softly. You can't think of a single thing you genuinely want to ask me because you don't actually care. That's not fair, Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. You put me on the spot. I gave you an opportunity, Reba corrected. An opportunity to show that everything I've been saying is wrong, and you couldn't take it. Jimmy walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. He looked defeated, exhausted. What do you want me to say? Jimmy, there are no words that would make this okay, Reba said. This entire interview has been a waste of time for both of us. You didn't get the light, fun segment you wanted, and I didn't get to have a meaningful conversation about my work. She stood up slowly, smoothing her outfit. I appreciate you having me on, Jimmy, but I don't think this is the right fit. I'm not going to sit here and continue a conversation that neither of us is enjoying. Jimmy's eyes widened. Wait, what are you doing? I'm leaving, Reba said simply. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't, and I'm not going to waste any more of your time or mine. You can't just leave, Jimmy said, panic creeping into his voice. We're in the middle of the show. Then fill it with something else, Reba said, already moving toward the edge of the stage. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Reba, please, Jimmy said, standing up again. Let's take a breath here. Let's reset and try again. We can make this work. Reba stopped and turned back to face him. Why would we try again? We've already established that you're not interested in having the kind of conversation I want to have. Why would we keep trying to force something that clearly isn't working? Because that's what professionals do, Jimmy said desperately. They work through problems. They don't just give up and walk away. Professionals also know when something isn't worth salvaging, Reba said. This interview crossed that line about 10 minutes ago. There's no dignity in walking off a show, Jimmy argued. People will think you're difficult, that you can't handle a simple interview. Reba smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Let them think what they want. I know who I am and what I stand for. I'd rather be seen as difficult than compromise my values just to make a talk show host comfortable. Your values? Jimmy said incredulously. This is about values now. It's always been about values, Reba said. About integrity, about authenticity, about treating people with respect. Those are my values, Jimmy. And I'm not going to abandon them just to make good television. Jimmy looked around at his crew, at the audience, at the camera still rolling. He looked lost. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Reba said gently. Not right now. Maybe later, after you've had time to think about everything we've discussed. You'll understand what I was trying to say. She turned and walked toward the stage exit. Jimmy called after her. Reba, if you leave now, you might not be invited back. Reba paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at him over her shoulder. Jimmy, with all due respect, after tonight, I wouldn't want to come back anyway. Take care of yourself. And with that, she walked off the stage. The audience sat in stunned silence. Jimmy stood frozen at his desk, watching her go, his face a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been regret. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Jimmy's expression as he processed what had just happened. Then he looked directly into the camera, forced a smile that didn't quite work, and said, Well, folks, that was unexpected. We're going to take a quick commercial break. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In those 15 minutes of live television, Reba McEntire had done something that rarely happens in the carefully controlled world of talk shows. She'd been completely, brutally honest, and in doing so, she'd walked away from one of the biggest platforms in entertainment without looking back. So, what do you think? Was Reba right to stand her ground and walk off? Or should she have just gone along with the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more stories like this one. Would you have done the same thing in her position, or would you have handled it differently?